Yes, I like that. Morning Target. How y'all guys doing? How y'all guys doing? Come on now. All right, that's better. Thank you. My name is Minsok Pak. I'm the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer here. And I got to tell you, I'm really excited about this morning's conversation. We have David Chang with us today. All right, yeah. So you guys all know David. You know that he's a developer, the creator of the Momo Fuku restaurant chain, restaurant empire, right, with a number of different types of restaurants in New York. I'm going to miss all the cities, but it's New York, LA, DC, Toronto, Sydney, Vegas. He's been awarded, I think, 4 or 5 different James Beard Foundation awards, including Best New Chef, Best Restaurant in New York, Best New Restaurant. One of his restaurants, I believe it's Momo Fuku Co., has received 2 Michelin stars every year since 2009. So the guy knows what he's doing. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to food. But he's also, he's an entrepreneur. He's branched outside of food. He's a New York Times bestseller author. He has an extremely popular podcast. And earlier this year, launched the runaway hit on Netflix, Ugly Delicious. You guys seen Ugly Delicious? And he's just, he's celebrated because of all of his endeavors. He's been named, I believe, as one of Fortune's 40 under 40. What else? Esquire's, one of Esquire's most influential people of the 21st century. Including GQ's Man of the Year. So when he comes on stage, let's take a look at his style. I mean, the guy, he brings his curiosity, his creativity to innovate. Innovate across different types of businesses. And I think that's tremendous insights that I think he'll bring to bear today. So really looking forward to the conversation. He's done all this while bringing and building a strong sense of loyalty with his customers as well. And so I think there's something there we can learn from. So with that, give your Target welcome to David Chang. All right, so David, I got a bunch of questions that, they asked me to go through, but I'm not going to go through this. I think we should just treat this as a conversation, and, we'll refer to some of these, but why don't we start with food? All right, let's go back to the beginning. How did you get into the food business?
My dad immigrated to this country in the early 60s, and like many immigrants, his first job was in restaurants. It's the only thing that he could do. Yeah. And he literally worked his entire life to make sure I would never work in restaurants. And what I've learned about myself at the age of 41 is I'm certainly drawn to the things that I'm told I cannot do.
Okay.
First and foremost. So
how many of you feel that?
So, went to college and there was a couple times I wanted to drop out. Not because I loved food, but I loved that it was like not cool, right?
And is that because of the dining hall food, or what was?
No, I think I was enamored with the fact that becoming a cook was almost like dropping out of society almost. It was not like cooking today, which is almost seen as a respectable profession now.
Okay.
So I was a total mess in college. So
you were a religious studies major.
A religion major that was interning at Payne Weber, which is now UBS, and I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And one of the things I did was try a little bit of everything and sort of scratch it off the list. And taught English out of when I went to Japan after college, and I sort of had a midlife crisis at the ripe old age of 22 for a lot of things that were going on in my life, right? Like September 11th happened, I had some really close friends pass away, and I didn't know if cooking was something that was going to be my calling. All I knew was that might be something that's better or more interesting than sitting at a desk, doing something I do not care about. So that was it. I just gave it a shot, and
going into it, did you know what you were doing? Had you been trained before?
No, I went to cooking school because I thought that's what I needed to do. But all I knew was I wanted to burn every bridge possible so I couldn't go back to a corporate world.
Okay.
I really did. And I was dead set on trying to
And decades later, you'll come back and talk to us about you wanted to burn those bridges.
Yeah. It was a really strange time for me. And cooking to me, what drew me wasn't necessarily the act of cooking. I just thought it was a more honest way of like living my life. And that's what was so important to me.
Okay.
So that's how I got into it. And I didn't know I was going to make it a profession, right? I didn't think that I would. I just wanted to see how deep the rabbit hole went for myself. So.
And what was the first professional entree into the industry then?
So cooking school, and I thought I was late because I had this weird idea that in America as a cook you start at age 14, 15, which was not the case. And I'm a pretty competitive person, and I thought that I was several years behind my competition. Because I played competitive golf as a kid, and I'm always looking, almost, like a very large neurosis of mine is always looking at the field and seeing who's going to do what. And I thought that I was way late, so I went to a 6-month program in 2000, and that was from 8 to 3 p.m., and from 4 to 1 a.m., I got home around 1 a.m., I worked at Mercer Kitchen, which is a Jean-Georges restaurant.
Okay.
And it was all day, every day. And the weekends, I was answering phones at Kraft. Yeah, it was like, for someone that was allergic to work.
You were working pretty hard.
Yeah, and that's when I realized, like, maybe I like this, right? I never experienced something where I'm like, oh, I want to do this. And that
so you found the passion.
Yeah, it was a passion.
Yeah.
And something I could get better at. And
including answering phones at Kraft on the weekends?
Wound up being one of the best decisions I've ever made.
In what way?
I think it's important that you go to where the talent is, right? I think it's also important to go to a place where there's not a lot of talent so you can see the disparity. But I had to make some money, and I worked for Tom Colicchio, who at the time was a chef at Gramercy Tavern, and was instrumental because I thought he was one of the first American chefs that tried to carve out a distinct voice of what American food could be. And he brought the best and the brightest of Gramercy Tavern, which I thought were the murderer's row of chefs, at Kraft. And the only way I could get my feet in the door were answering phones.
Okay.
And I learned that, like, there's probably a handful of moments in everyone's life, at least for myself, where there's a slight crack in that door. And it's not about opening it gently, it's about like
sticking
jamming your foot into it and like trying to kick it down. And I answered phones not because I wanted to, because I wanted to get in that kitchen. And I knew that where I was working at Mercer Kitchen, while it was great, it wasn't necessarily for me. And I saw the passion, I saw the discipline and the creativity and the technique of the amazing chefs that were downstairs. I was like, that's where I need to be.
Yeah.
And I'm so far away from doing it, I'll work for free to get there. And I'll answer phones so I can make a living.
So find that thing, right, where it creates that opportunity, stick your foot in the door, and look for the,
Because
But your first restaurant, tell me about your first restaurant that you started, because my understanding is that wasn't a runaway success right from the start.
Yeah, again, a lot of stuff happened in my life, and when stuff happens in your life, it allows me to sort of see what's really important. What's really important is sort of life and death, and then everything in between that is like not that important. One of which was, I was 26, many of my friends were going to business school. That was just my peer group were not cooks. They were all people that went to some of the best colleges and universities, and they thought I was out of my mind to begin with. And I saw how much...
So you guys realize that David's just describing this parallel path that he and I traversed probably, a decade apart. But it was, okay, I was around 26, went to business school, I couldn't find a... So anyway.
Yeah, right? Like, you see this time and time again, and there's nothing wrong with this, but I saw that they had opportunities that I didn't have, and they wanted to expand their sort of horizons and learn more. And at the end of the day, I was like, they're going to probably spend like $250,000 on business school over 2 years with room and board and like whatever. They're too high, but I was like, I can do that way cheaper.
So again, parallel path somewhat.
I'm going to do that, and I'll take a loan out, and I will do that, and I'll start my own business, even though I don't know what I'm doing. And the hardest part was doing it to convince yourself that a bad idea was worth it because everyone told me it was a bad idea. Unequivocally, it was a bad idea. And had I had more wisdom or rational thought, I would have said no.
Going into it, did you expect that you were going to fail?
I had no idea what I was doing. I swear to God, it was simply, it became something that I could focus on to get my life in order because it was so hard. And I also, what was freeing to do it was, what's the worst thing that can happen? Bankruptcy? Yeah, that sucks, but I'll have the rest of my life to get out of that if need be. Like, I'm scrappy, I'll figure it out. And once I got over a lot of the hurdles that you might experience in doing anything that is pressure-filled and risk-driven, ultimately to me, so many of the things that might cause someone to be a wallflower, I was like, what's the big deal, right? What's really
the worst that could happen?
The worst thing that's gonna happen?
I'm gonna wake up tomorrow, I'm still living, I'm still breathing.
As long as I'm not harming anyone, as long as I'm trying to do something great in like a fantastic like moral compass, like what's the worst thing that's gonna happen? So that became my like driving force.
And what happened to that first restaurant? It
was horrible. It was easily one of the most painful things I've ever gone through. And I was so dead set on opening a restaurant. When it opened, I was not prepared. Sales tax, you know, like legal bills, all these things. Like, and I'd done a lot of this stuff myself. I went to war with Nissan Foods, a cup of noodles, because they wanted to take the name Momo Fuku. Like all these things that when you realize you're the boss, you can't just focus on like what is a small task. Like everything matters now. And I was so worried about that, I wasn't even worried about the food, just operating the restaurant. I literally lived like 100 feet away, and I was there all day, every day. But what happened was we made every mistake under the sun. Because I was not trained, I didn't have any PR, like media training, we were in an open kitchen, I would have meltdowns in front of people. It's true, it was like, because I didn't care. Like,
friendly, mild-mannered David today.
We made so many mistakes because no one told us what was right, no one told us what was wrong, we were just figuring it out on our own. And you know, like this is a horrible analogy, but having had a lot of cancer in my life and my family, you know, it's funny when you see that person that is given like a terminal diagnosis and they're like, oh shit, I want to live. Yeah. And I was like, wait, basically my accountant told me like 6 months in is you have like 2 months before you have to close up shop. I was like, oh, this is a terminal diagnosis. Yeah. What do most people do? They start living life, they start doing all the things that they weren't supposed to do. So we just went crazy. We did everything you are not supposed to do.
Can you give me an example?
Kicking customers out if we didn't like them. Seriously. Yeah. You know, I remember very vividly one customer came in and she or he said like, oh, the music's too loud. And I wasn't there, I was cooking. My partner, Joaquin at the time, turned it up. And I looked at him and I was like, who cares?
So all that time you talked about the moral compass. I mean, what was that vision or that moral compass that you were driving towards that would, you know, give you the confidence or the desperation, right, 2 months out to say, you know, customer, thank you, but no thank you?
I think for me, what I realized and what was the sort of central, like when we went through this crucible, what I learned was if I'm only worried about myself, it's going to certainly fail. And I need to be the facilitator for those that are around me. I remember pretty early on, one of my cooks had like an issue with his liver, and we didn't have the ability to give him health care and I was like, oh wait, like it's my responsibility now to make sure that we provide the best for him. Yeah. And that's when I realized like, wait, I have to get everyone on the same page. And I'm not doing a good job communicating what is important here, why we need to make great food, so on and so forth. And it just sort of gelled over time. When it shouldn't have, it did.
Right. It's really about that articulating the purpose of what brings you guys together, and that it wasn't just about...
That's it. Like, I feel that the name of the game, I'm sure it's not just in the restaurant business, is communication. And as sort of cliche as that sounds, I was still communicating back then when I was 27 years old while oftentimes yelling and not very good at communicating, I was still trying to convey the same things that I'm trying to convey now in a different, mature fashion.
But all along, there's that. I'm hearing this consistency of that moral compass, the purpose, what is the reason for being, as you and your team came together. And I think the analogy for us is that our purpose, right, of helping all families discover the joy. So regardless. And I hope that we don't have leaders who scream and jump, and maybe we do. But it is about getting everyone around that. That is the equivalent of our moral compass.
Right, and that's the thing is, the yelling part. And certainly I was a yeller when I was younger, and I still might yell, and I'm not perfect, and I've gotten a lot better, and I can't rationalize how I behaved in the past. But like, I didn't know how to communicate. I wanted to get better.
Yeah.
I just didn't have the tools at my disposal, and I've worked really hard
and that's
to get
something
there.
that you developed over the years.
And that's why I'm okay. When I see younger chefs that work for me that are like really rough, I'm not telling them you have to, you can't make mistakes. I want all of my team to make as many mistakes as possible, whether they're actual actions or decisions they've made, because that's the only way you're going to get better. So what we really try to do over the years is to instill.
How do you create this environment and the culture of making the mistakes, learning from them, and then moving on, and getting everyone around you to feel comfortable that that's not only expected, but it almost sounds like somewhat encouraged?
I think for me, I've had to be the embodiment of that. If I make a mistake, I want everyone to know it. Right? And if I do something successful, I want to not take any credit for it. I want to make sure that everyone that did something great gets the credit for it. And to constantly be screwing up and picking myself up and doing it over and over again. But what I've learned that's important is to be as transparent as possible about it. And this is like a ridiculous side note about this. We just opened up in LA, and I think honesty is so important for me, is just being honest about that transparency. Long story cut short, one of our servers the first week screwed up an order, and we had a critic in the house, and they dropped the food twice, the same dish, and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
And it was at the bar, and they come back, and they're like, oh, they never got the food, and I came back and I dropped the food, and then the customer slash critic was like, we've already had this dish. And I'm like, oh my God. And I walk around the back and I kick the door open. And the entire restaurant saw it. And I was like, oh my gosh. I worked so hard not to express my anger, and I kicked the door like a dummy, and everyone saw how stupid I was. And more importantly—
So talk about transparency. That was transparent.
Very transparent. But what I realized right off the bat was how dumb I was and how hypocritical I was, because this is probably our first day, even though we had 2 weeks of training, and I've been preaching to everyone, make mistakes, don't be afraid to make a mistake. And the next day, got everyone in, and I apologized, and I said, I screwed up. I screwed up by not just kicking the door, I screwed up by being a hypocrite because I told you to make a mistake. Someone makes a mistake, and the first thing I do is I freak out.
Yeah.
And that's what I've learned to do, is if I can be honest about that, then hopefully someone else will be like, hey, no one here is a perfect individual. We all make mistakes. And if I can communicate that mistake, it might not prevent someone from making the same mistake, but they might learn from it in a different way.
I think that's a great lesson for us all, right? Because we talk about encouraging and learning from our mistakes and failures, but it's one thing to talk it and try to be transparent. The other is actually exhibit it, and that's hard for individuals. I know it's hard for me to do, for individuals to acknowledge that. So thank you, I appreciate you doing that. Now, on that vein, let me just switch gears a little bit. What's the one menu item that you think was the biggest flop?
Oh man, there's so many.
And how do you come up with your menu items? I mean, you're known for some creative dishes.
So some of the food, for instance, the pork bun, I thought was originally going to be a flop. And people that are from Taiwan are like, oh, you just took it from Taiwan. I was like, look at my passport. I'd never been to Taiwan. I had no idea what that was. And there was no internet at the time, so it's not like I could Google it. It was just random things that I thought would be good. And then the best dishes for me are the ones that have had constraint. Because I was on such a
by
tight budget.
Okay.
I'm a huge proponent of having limits. And Momo Fuku, for instance, we had an open kitchen, we had no budget, that's why everything was minimal. It's not because I had a Japanese aesthetic in mind, we didn't have money.
Again, a great lesson for us around constraint-based budgeting.
You know, they're like, why did you want an open kitchen? I was like, because that's all we could afford. And part of what came out of that was like, all right, we're serving ramen, like what else can we make with this pork belly? And then I was like, oh, I love going to this place, Oriental Garden. They have these Peking duck buns. Maybe I could just like find out as many ways to do something with the same thing and be, you know, like militant about that. And all the good ideas came out of that. All the bad ideas for us came when we removed the constraint.
Really?
We're not good enough to just take from the world and say, this is the dish, and it's going to be great. I really
so you needed a forcing mechanism to do something, to create something, right?
I mean, I could go on and on about dishes that were total flops, but I think that there's definitely a pattern to those that have failed. It's because they weren't edited enough, or they were, they had just the world at large. I always look at making a dish like a crayon box, right? Everyone thinks having 128 colors is the best thing in the world. Well, you got to figure out how to like color with the basic 5 first. And that's, for me, the best dishes are the ones that come out of frugality for us and necessity.
Interesting. And how has that translated into opening up other restaurants, different types of restaurants? And you do that, if I understand correctly, you know, by helping your chefs, others, right, to open up. So how do you create, how do you innovate with, you know, with an eye towards constraint-based kind of innovation?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I think part of that process of collaboration happened because I was never destined to be a great chef, right? And everything happened, again, by accident. And I'm sure had I been proclaimed as like this hot up-and-comer, my ego would have been so big. It's like, my ideas are the best, yours sucks. Because I was the polar opposite of that, I was so inquisitive to find out other people's knowledge, what they were good at, what they knew better than I did. And from the get-go, it was like cobbling together the best thing, like trying to make it egoless in terms of the construction of a menu or a restaurant. And where I have made mistakes in the past is when I've just decided we're going to do what worked for us in the past. If anything, I've learned nothing that works for you in the past will ever work for you moving forward. In fact, past success is almost a guarantee you will fail.
Let's hope that's not the case right now.
Well, no, but what I mean...
Because we've had a couple of quarters of good
Let me rephrase that in the sense that past success creates complacency.
Yeah.
It creates entitlement.
Absolutely.
And it creates this thing that like whatever we're going to do is going to work. That hubris kills everything.
Yeah.
So...
You have to stay hungry.
Yeah.
You have to stay a bit paranoid.
Humility is so important.
Right. You learn from the mistakes, what works, what doesn't work as well. Yeah, I know, I absolutely get that. And as you think about this, then how do you avoid, right? It seems like, I'm not a foodie or anything like that, I just like food, right? I like to go to restaurants, but it seems like there's a lot of people picking up on bandwagons, right? So, you know, how many more times am I going to eat a beet salad? You know, it's just, everyone's just kind of picking up on, so as you think about innovating, but doing it in a way that where you say, it is constraint-based, I don't want to do the same thing I've done before, how do you avoid falling into the trap of doing what everyone else is doing?
It's a great question. I feel that part of that is knowing the past. I'm a big student of gastronomy, not just Western, but hopefully all, I want to learn everything. And what you learn is everything's been done already. My job is just to do it a little bit better and repackage it in a way that might be done differently, but ultimately pay respect to someone that's already done it or a farmer that's made it, and understand that whoever's also making the food or serving the food, that's just as important as the idea. Yeah. So first and foremost, it's an idea that can be actionable and you can execute it at a high level. And then, so just doing that right off the bat, that takes a lot of the foo-foo like dishes that you can do, right?
So it's not innovation for the sake of innovation.
No.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge advocate for what people call molecular gastronomy, but that's a horrible name for it, but what got lost was the idea of the real, I think, takeaway from modern cooking was people started to ask the question, why? Why is something delicious? What is the ingredient that makes that delicious? And incorporating all that in a dish, and I guess I could talk for 5 hours about the idea, like the thinking process of making food, because I do think about it all the time, but I think that the common thread for me is, what is everyone not doing?
Yeah.
Right?
So doing something that's truly going to be differentiating,
yeah,
recognizing that it's probably in some form or fashion being done or already being done. Right?
And sometimes the best ideas are the dishes where people think it's already played out, like a beet salad, right? Because no one thinks you can do innovation, oftentimes it's the best times to do it. Because people are like, oh, it's already been done, you can't do anything with it. I'm like, I love it when people drop something because they feel like it's a mistake.
Yeah.
You know, there's value. Like, I love sports, I love Moneyball, I love anything where people can derive value out of something or something that's delicious. When people, not everyone, but your peer group at large thinks that there's nothing there.
So doing things in a way that's uniquely you.
Yeah, that all means being authentic to yourself, right?
Just being authentic, that's uniquely you, consistent with your values, your perspectives, your outlook.
And that's what we try to preach to every one of our restaurants. And for instance, in Australia, we're a restaurant in a casino, right? In the Southern Hemisphere, in Sydney, Australia, and we have probably the only African-American chef in Australia, right? Making food from Barbados. And I think it's the best restaurant in Australia, or one of the best restaurants in the world. And because we let it happen.
And how did that come about?
Paul's one of the best chefs I know. I'm not going to tell Paul, hey, you have to make food this way, right? Like, I love sports. It's like when you get a quarterback and you don't play to their strengths. To me, that's just stupid. And Paul could do anything, but we also have tropical ingredients in Australia.
Right.
He has access to some of the best ingredients. They may not be the same that he's grown up with in the Caribbean, but they're very similar. And the quality's so high that he can cook food that he couldn't cook in America. And you don't expect to get one of the best sort of Caribbean meals of your life in a casino in Australia. I love the fact that it was a bad idea too, the casino. Because everyone thinks, oh, you can't do it. Like, if you go to a casino restaurant, the idea was,
you get the endless shrimp buffet.
yeah, it can't be great.
And I know how you feel about, shrimp buffets. So.
It can't be great. So I love putting an impossible goal. We're going to have our best restaurant in a casino in a country that's as far away as possible.
From the Caribbean.
Yeah, and that's how it happens. Like, you could not have
so
a
what you've
strategy
described,
session
from the strategy standpoint, what you've just described for me is setting that expectation, the goal, right, lofty goal, recognizing that you may fail, going into it with eyes wide open, bringing the best team along with you, the best quarterback, the best talent, building on the strengths and what you have at your disposal, the assets that you have, right, which are the tropical ingredients, may not be exact, but that's what you have. That's the strength. You got the talent, create the right environment, and do something that others may say it's a little kooky, but let's see how it works.
Yeah, and I oftentimes when we open up restaurants, I don't even think too much about the actual dish or food. I reverse engineer everything. How do I want a customer to leave, right?
So
that's the only thing that matters.
What's the experience and the feeling you want them to have when they leave?
Yeah, like how we get there ultimately doesn't matter as long as they feel elation. And we need to do everything in our power to make sure we get there.
By the way, I don't think he's read our strategy documents or anything like this, but I mean, what he's describing is, the value proposition we want our guests to feel, right? We want them to feel welcome. We want them to feel inspired. We want them to feel rewarded and at ease when they have their experience with us. And so we know what that feeling is we want our guests to have. And
a unique
that's what
experience.
And a unique experience, yeah.
I mean, there's targets all over the world. Like, if people feel that, like, I can still go to this place and I know that it's for me. That's an incredible feeling. And that's what food can do at its very best. It can unify, it can bring the world smaller in the best way possible. And one of the best things I've experienced is, even as a restaurant customer, is when you leave thinking that I'm so glad I spent my money there. Because it's like watching a great movie or listening to a great album. It's something you have to tell other people. Hey, you won't believe it, you know? Like, for instance, I wanted to hate
We get that from a lot of our guests. You won't believe it. I went in to go get some toilet paper, and I just ended up with a cart.
But why not? Right? Like, why can't people walk in and be like, dude, if you're going to get toilet paper, it better be a Target.
Because you never know. You'll walk out of there with an entire basket of clothes.
Yeah, like, but that's a legitimate thing. That's the kind of stuff that gets me so excited, because it's like a weird paradox of putting two things together that you would not think would ever happen. Toilet paper and amazing customer experience.
Yeah. There you have it, folks. Toilet paper and amazing customer experience.
And if you ask like how I come up with dishes, like, it's a lot like that. It's like, oh, there's something there. It's not impossible. Okay, let's see what happens.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's been done at one point or another, but I'll do it my own way and create something. But I know from, at least based on some of the episodes that I've watched, that, you know, and my partner's in the audience over there, and she knows this, but I fundamentally believe if you kind of trace a lot of things back, it was all created in Korea.
I also did not talk about this.
It's, you know, burritos, it's, you know, come on now. It's tacos, all the same thing. So you went from, so you started out, first restaurant, you know, on the verge of collapse, turned it around by doing things your way, authentically, expanded, very successful now in a number of different cities, in different formats, right, and done so with an approach to building the team, learning from the mistakes, et cetera. What took you from that then to branch out into other areas, right? You're now an author, podcast, the show.
There's never really been strategy to anything we've done.
I didn't hear that.
It's very different now. But
Thank you.
It is, because now we have people that keep me in check, right? And I want people to tell me no, right? Like, no, Dave, that's a horrible idea. Like,
by the way, that's not the role of strategy. Right? It's not just to say no.
No, but what I mean by that was so much of it was organic. And growing organically, what I've learned is not having a plan whatsoever, right? And that used to work for us. It doesn't work anymore at all. We have to, like, so the media then, 10 years ago when we started to do it, was people were asking, we said no, and then finally you find a partner that you want to work with, that you find like-minded interest in, and like, okay, maybe we can do something great. So it's not about just doing something for like being on TV. It's like, how do we do something extraordinary?
Yeah.
So what is now the TV show Mind of a Chef originally was called Lucky Peach. That was not going to be a TV show. It was going to be the first cooking show on the iPad app, on iPad 2. But the technology got wonky, and long story cut short, it ended. We also had this stupid idea that we were going to have the newest technology of media on an iPad, and we were going to pair it with an old school magazine as a companion. Again, bad ideas that we're like, screw it, let's just see what happens. Obviously, the app never happened. Later, it got repurposed as a TV show, but it could be repurposed as a TV show because we were committed to quality to begin with. It just got re-edited as such, and we also had a magazine that were like, screw it, let's just keep on doing this. Something that was a total accident turned out to be something completely different. So in terms of our pursuit of doing something excellent, to me, it's no different than trying to serve something excellent on a plate. In the same vein, like, we have a fried chicken sandwich shop called Fuku, which is obviously a lower price point. I want someone that eats that sandwich to feel the same way when someone drops $500 at Co. Right? Like, value.
Yeah.
There's some innovation or something interesting. It was fun. I want people to feel like this is a brand that I can trust.
So there's the foundational set of experiences, there's a foundational set of beliefs that you have that regardless of what it is, even if it fails, you're saying that, you know, that's what can carry over.
It's commitment to excellence.
Yeah. It's the commitment to excellence and that feeling that your customers have when they leave.
And I think there is a thread, even though, like, we have Ugly Delicious now. It's not like anything else we've ever done. But I think for me, in terms of who I am, I'm committed to being as honest and transparent as possible. That's just who I am as a person. And I wanted to be able to use this to tell certain stories that I felt were important to tell, right? And just because that's a TV show, I feel like we do the same thing with our food, right? It's very hard for me to articulate, but when we start doing this, I feel like there's a lot of correlation in everything we do, whether it's media or a dish.
There's that thread that goes through.
Exactly.
So let's talk about Ugly Delicious real quickly. I mean, at any point did you, or did your friends or family or others say, you know, there are lots of food shows, TV shows out there. Why this one? What's unique? What's different?
First and foremost, I thought, because after the TV show, first one, which turned into a TV show, I didn't do any media. I stopped doing late night television, I stopped doing TV at all because it's not what I wanted to do. So I wanted to be able to walk down the street and not have someone be like, hey, that, I want some privacy. So I didn't want to do TV. But when you meet people that are amazing, I got to meet Morgan Neville. He won an Oscar for 20 Feet from Stardom. If you haven't seen it, it's an amazing movie. He was also behind probably one of the best docs I've ever seen, the Mr. Rogers documentary. He is one of the great filmmakers out there that is committed to telling the truth in a way that is compelling. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy wants to do something with me? Okay, I'm so lucky, let's try to do something different. And part of that is trusting this process of working with great people. That's always so important to me you gotta work with the best or aspire to work with the best. And getting to work with Morgan turned out to be something else. And then, hey, Netflix wants to do it with us. I was like, okay, great. I didn't want to do it. And then in a week it was, okay, let's give this our all. And it was not a planned thing at all. You present it with opportunity and you can see that you can do excellent work. Let's try to do it if it's in our bandwidth.
Mm-hmm. And as you think now going forward, right, so a lot of these things you talked about how it happened organically, wasn't really planned or developed a strategy around it or anything like this. What's the strategy for you going forward? How do you think about this portfolio of stuff that you've got going on?
My single focus that keeps me doing this is to be able to change how my cooks and definitely my hourly employees get paid. And there are a lot of people doing great things in the culinary world, and I tend to believe that for me and my path and what I believe the Momo Fuku can be, we can only affect change through growth and through profitability. And I might disagree with many things like Chipotle might do. It's huge. I can't think of a company that's changed gastronomy more than Chipotle, right? The past 10 years, 15 years. They've changed the entire poultry industry, right? It's way better. Chickens are raised way better than it was 15 years ago.
I had no idea.
Right? Whether people are just slapping it as a marketing table, it's people now are our chickens have to be free range, or at least, at the very least, not in cages. Right? Okay. That's not the end goal, but it's a step in the right direction. And there are many of my peers that are doing amazing work. Dan Giusti of Brigade, God bless him. He used to be the head chef of Noma. He's now trying to change school lunches, right? I'm not trying to be everything to everyone. I think for me, what my lifelong goal would be, how do I make my cooks paid top dollar, right? Where they can, a living wage isn't $15 an hour. I'm sorry, it's just not, especially in New York City. So how do we get it where they're paid top dollar so we can offer all the same things that a great, company like Target offers their employees? That's an impossible goal that is worth at least growing to see. And
is that going to require a fundamental change of the restaurant model?
Why not? I think the restaurant model is broken, right? It's definitely not working.
Yeah.
I don't think it's working, and it needs to be better. It just has to be better. So.
And what do you see as needing to change? What are some of the big components of the restaurant model that have to change as a result?
I think we've seen a lot of that this past year with the Me Too movement in terms of how people are treated in the kitchen. I think a lot of that has to happen with honestly how much the customers, I don't want to put a dollar sign to that, but people need to pay more money for their food. first and foremost. We can't have $1 hamburger, right? And I'm tired when critics say, oh, that restaurant's too expensive. I'm like, do you know
what goes into it?
Yeah, it's like there's no margins in this business. So that has to change, but so much of it has to be with education of what food is, how it came there. It's a resource, and it's something that I'm obviously very passionate about, but I think it's about being as transparent as possible and letting people know, well, this dollar is going here, here, and here. It's not going in my pocket per se. And
so could you imagine in the future, you know, the transparency on the menu to say, this entree that's on the menu for $26, here's how much is going for food, here's how much is going for prep, here's how much is almost like an ingredient label.
I have had this conversation before, and while I understand it, I think that should be a given, right? I'm not someone that says, oh, we just got our fish fresh today. Like, what else is it supposed to be? We have fresh fruit. I'm like, what do you do when it's not a fresh fruit day? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I like canned tomatoes.
So for me, it's trying to figure out, listen, the model, obviously, when I say broken, what I meant to say is it can be much better. Yeah. I don't have the answers. I'm in the process of trying to figure it out.
So David Chang, guys, he's changing the retail industry, right? Doing things to change the retail industry. I think that's also a good lesson for us because we're doing some things to change retail. You're changing restaurant, we're changing retail.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. To me, what makes me happy as a person is service, right? Yeah. In a weird way. And I don't think many people would think that me is in the hospitality industry. I just think that there's more than one way to get to the end goal of making someone happy. And it's not just the customer. It's got to be your employees. It's got to be your farmers and your purveyors and the whole thing. And if it's not, I don't know if it works, like long term, right? You have to be able to provide for other people, at least for me.
So in terms of providing for you, right, picking up on that a little bit, what do you do for yourself as a chef?
That's what I'm learning. And it's super important. I did a talk a couple years ago, and I made a brief joke, but it's true. I had an executive coach, and he came in and he did a whole analysis of my company, and he was like, I don't understand why people work here. I don't understand why people like working here. And it's true. It was, and what I learned was, he's like, because you are the furthest thing from being happy, Dave. And I had to really marinate on that. It's a hard thing to hear, because I thought that it's something you would just be, right? Today we're going to be happy. It doesn't work like that. And I'm not a born leader. I've made every mistake possible, but my goal is to get better as a person, as a manager, as a chef. And part of that is learning that for me, I can't just, my addiction is work. I could work, talk about work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And I have done it most of my life. I'm 41 years old. I got married a couple years ago. I put away my personal life. Like, there are sacrifices you do to get to like what you might want to do, and I sacrificed everything. And I don't know if it was worth it. I'm pretty sure I could have baked in some more personal life. And that's been a hard reckoning for me to understand that the order in my restaurants does not reflect the order in my personal life. And for me to genuinely have customers and employees that are happy, I have to be the embodiment of that. So for that to happen, I got to work on myself, and I'm a work in progress, right?
I think that's terrific, right? It's the whole idea that if we want to make others happy, if we want to bring joy to others around us, right, we first have to be able to grant ourselves that same, do that for us as well as individuals.
That's hard. And just because you know it doesn't mean you can like find it actionable. Yeah. I've known this for a while.
Just saying it doesn't do it.
Exactly.
Right? So running out of time here, but just 1 second. Right? I'll be right back. And I promise I'll be right back. Yeah.
Oh no.
So you guys probably, I asked the question, what do chefs do for themselves? Because you probably assume that as a chef, right, James Beard award-winning, et cetera, you're going to be cooking up the most creative, amazing dishes at home. But one of the things that I learned in watching Ugly Delicious was actually growing up in Virginia, you're a big fan of Domino's.
That was my first pizza.
Right? And you actually, on the show, you served as a Domino's driver, for a bit. So, as an appreciation,
I can't believe you did this.
As a form of appreciation, just wanted to thank you for coming to Minneapolis.
I heard you guys have like some of the best pizza in America here.
We do. And
this is my pizza.
It is your pizza. It's a bacon onion Alfredo pizza. Right? This is your favorite. Now, as you said, we've got some great restaurants here. We have great pizza here. Now, don't view this as a bribe or anything like this. But if at any point you ever get the inclination or desire to open a restaurant in Minneapolis, I think we'd all be there, right?
Well, it's funny. I think this is actually important to talk about. People are like, "Oh, Domino's must have paid you a ton of money." I was like, "I wish." But it was important because this is the viewpoint that I'm trying to understand. That I'm surrounded with food snobs and the foodie elite. I'm one of them, and the hypocrisy there drives me crazy because we all talk about, oh, the best pizza has to be this place in Italy or this place in Minneapolis, whatever. But what if you never had access to that? And if I grew up eating Domino's, I was this kid that loved Domino's. Am I an idiot for saying I like Domino's pizza? That's ridiculous.
Right.
And I think all of us need to eat some humble pie a little bit. It makes a lot of people happy, right?
It's the simple things that bring joy, right? Simple things that make people happy.
They may not have the opportunity yet. Of course there's more delicious pizza out there, but no one should be made fun of because they like something, right? That's ridiculous. So that's why I love saying Domino's Pizza, because the pizza police, they get so pissed.
All right, so with that, David, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you being here with us today. You can take our pizza.
All right.
All right. Thanks, guys.